Hello and welcome to India Tonight. I'm Karan Thapar. An article in yesterday's Business Standard argues that the government's estimates for growth for this year are completely wrong and the best India can expect is something between 4 and 5%. What's the basis for this claim? Does it stand up to scrutiny? And if it does, what does it tell us about the government and its response to the economic crisis? Those are the issues I shall raise today with the author of the article, the chairman of Oxis Investments, Surjit Bhalla. Surjit Bhalla, in an article you wrote for the Business Standard yesterday, you argued that GDP growth for the year 2008-2009 will be somewhere between 4 and 5%, which is roughly 2 or 3% below the government's own estimate. Now, before I ask you how you come to this conclusion, let me first ask, how confident are you of this conclusion?
Actually, about as confident an economist can be when he or she looks at the numbers. Remember, for this year, we've already got almost 11 months of data. The February exports have come out. So we've got a lot of information. And it doesn't take that much imagination to think how March will go in order for you to come out with the numbers.
Except that last Sunday, which is a good 2 or 3 days after the Q3 figures came out, the finance minister in an interview told me that he still expected, despite the Q3 figures, that the economy would grow by 7%. Are you saying that Pranab Mukherjee is completely wrong?
Well, I'll put it this way. He's got a lot on his plate. He is handling the foreign ministry, and he's handling the economics, and he's handling Ministry of Finance. So, there may be a lot of confusion, but yes, I think he's completely wrong.
In other words, you're also saying that Pranab Mukherjee has got too many things to actually get this one fact right. But you are therefore nailing your colors as an economist of repute to the belief that GDP for the year ending March 31, 2009 will not be greater than 5% growth.
Absolutely. And if you recall, I'm nailing my whatever you said in the same fashion when I said 6 months ago on your program that inflation would peak out very, very soon.
All right. And you were right then, as it turns out. And so I'm going to assume for the purposes of this discussion, you're going to be right again. Mm-hmm. In simple English, so that laymen can follow you, explain to me how you come to the conclusion that GDP growth for the year 2008-2009 will be only somewhere between 4 and 5%.
It's actually quite straightforward. GDP growth consists of 4 quarters. Think of each quarter as a year. So I add up the growth rate for the 4 quarters, I divide by 4, and I get the estimate for the full year. Now, what has happened, this is the practice of the government, our data numbers, is that they take, as a shorthand approximation, they take the GDP level in October to December 2008 over the GDP level of 2007, October to December, take the percentage change and say that's the growth rate for the fiscal year. But our fiscal year is from April to next March. So, when things are moving along smoothly and there's hardly any change from quarter to quarter, that approximation turns out to be right. But as you know, we are in very unusual times. The growth rate, for example, in January to March was somewhere around 8%. The growth rate October to December, when you look at it in isolation, was somewhere around 1%. You assuming that we'll grow at 7% is just not on the cards.
What you're in effect saying is that the practice that the government followed, which was okay and acceptable in normal times, simply is not acceptable today because the times, far from being normal, are extraordinarily bad, and to extrapolate on the basis of the old practice in this unusual situation is to get yourself into a terrible problem.
Which is what I think the government has done, yes.
Now, if I understand your methodology a little further, what you're doing is you're taking GDP growth for the first 9 months, which is April to December, and on that basis you're forecasting the full year's growth.
Well, with a minor correction, I know the GDP growth for the first 9 months, and I'm saying that the January to March, the quarter we are in, will show an acceleration over the previous quarter. But the previous quarter, we only grew at 1%. So even if we grow at 3%, that's all I'm doing. So I'm not taking the 9-month growth rate, assuming this will stay for the next 3 months.
You are accepting that quarter 4 will be better than quarter 3, but you're saying that will only be marginally better. And secondly, you're saying that quarter 3 was so poor that that marginal improvement will not actually be a big improvement, it will be literally just a marginal improvement.
Absolutely.
Which is why when Kamal Nath turns around and says that someone like Surjit Bhalla has ignored the fact that quarter 4 is going to be better than quarter 3, you're saying, no, I haven't ignored it. I actually accept it's going to be better, but it will be so marginally better that it really won't make a big difference.
Actually, it turns out that even if it is better than marginally, let us say there's a 3 or 4 percentage point acceleration of this quarter over last quarter, even then you get to only about 4.5%.
Which means that, in fact, even if quarter 4 surprises us and increases at double the expectation you have of it, it's quarter 3 that's going to sink growth because that was so bad. As you said, quarter 3 was just 1% growth.
And quarter 4 maximum is going to be about 4%, which is a huge acceleration over the 1% growth rate that we saw in the third quarter. That's the problem.
Which is why you come to your conclusion that no matter what sort of acceleration of growth you see in quarter 4, the overall growth for the year ending March 31, 2009 is going to be somewhere between 4 and 5% and not more.
Yes, and I would think that if I had to take a bet with some odds, it'll be closer to 4 and below rather than closer to 5 and above.
You mean it could actually be lower than 4.5?
Absolutely. I think very likely it'll be lower than 4.5.
That's particularly worrying, isn't it?
Because
Because that is hugely off the government's estimate.
And what is worrying is precisely that the government just doesn't seem to get it.
Now,